One, two, three, four.
Hello, you're listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But Skylight is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep Skylight alive, please visit our website at skylightbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Lynell George is a journalist and essayist. After Image, Los Angeles Outside the Frame was her first book of essays and photography, exploring the city where she grew up. As a staff writer for both the Los Angeles Times and LA Weekly, she focused on social issues, human behavior, visual arts, music, and literature. She taught journalism at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. In 2013, was named a USC Annenberg Getty Arts Journalism Fellow, and in 2017, received the Huntington Library's Alan Jutzi Fellowship for her studies of California writer Octavia E. Butler. A contributing arts and culture columnist for KCET Artbound, her commentary has also been featured in numerous news and feature outlets. Her liner notes for Otis Redding Live at the Whiskey A Go-Go earned a 2018 Grammy Award. Louise Steinman is a writer, artist, and literary curator. Her 3 books include The Crooked Mirror, a memoir of Polish-Jewish reconciliation, The Knowing Body, the artist as storyteller in contemporary performance, and The Souvenir, a daughter discovers her father's war. Steinman founded and was for 25 years the curator of the celebrated Aloud literary series at the Los Angeles Public Library. Her essays have been published widely. She is co-director of the Los Angeles Institute for Humanities at the University of Southern California. Please join me in welcoming Lynell and Louise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome. Thank
everybody.
you.
Seeing some familiar names in the chat. Thank you, Skylight, for hosting us. Louise, I miss you.
I just want to start. First, I want to thank Skylight, which is my neighborhood bookstore, a great bookstore. Thank you so much for hosting this. And then just to start, Lynell, I just have to say how deeply moved I was reading this book. I've known you were working on a book about Octavia for years. I didn't really know what kind of book it would be. And it's such a special, a really unique book. And I hope we can give some of that feeling tonight of what makes it such a special book. So I wanted to start just with just a little bit of the background. How were you invited into the archive at the Huntington Library, which is the Octavia Butler archive?
Right. Well, I had coffee with Julia Meltzer, who's the director of Clock Shop, and I had, which is an arts organization in Los Angeles, and they do lots of great work. They're in Frogtown, and they just wonderful programming. And she had invited me in to do one project and then invited me to coffee and said, I have this idea. I want to do some programming around Octavia Butler, and I would like to invite writers and artists to work in the archive and develop pieces that in some way, shape, or form, and it could be open, to whatever you wanted to do, but what inspires you. And she gave me sort of a loose structure, saying like, maybe because I'm a journalist, maybe you can do something like a posthumous interview. And I thought, what would that look like? What would that sound like? What would that feel like? I have no idea. But I said, sure, because of course, I want to go hang out at the archive at the Huntington. So I get in that way. And when I get there, there is a finding aid, which documents all of the holdings, and it's this thick, like in a binder. Like I can't, it's
Wow.
huge. And there are almost 400 boxes of materials, 350 or 60 boxes.
I wrote it down. 386.
86. See, I transposed. It was overwhelming. I mean, and it's not just manuscripts. It's notebooks, diaries, her newspaper clippings, old pencils, old pens, old notebook binders, her shopping lists, her bills, her check stubs.
So what's really incredible, I mean, not only that all that stuff is there, but that she saved it. So someone who, and also we need to know she gifted it. So she thought to give this collection to the Huntington, right? They pursued it, or she gave it?
They pursued it. Sue Hodson, who was at the time it just went out of my head. The literary manuscript curator, she went to an event and saw Butler speak and was blown away. And so went up afterward and, stuck her hand out and shook her hand and told her that and had her card, and said, I don't know if you've been thinking about what you would like to do with your archive, but we would love to have it. And it was, many, many years ago. So it wasn't even something that was even close to, I think even in Octavia's mind, like, oh yeah, sure, perhaps. But some years pass and they are put together again. I think Sue is going to pick Octavia up for an event at the Huntington. And it was mentioned again. And at that point, Octavia had made a decision, yes, don't worry, the Huntington's in my will. And Sue tells this story about, and of course, when Octavia dies so young at 58, Sue said, she goes, I never thought I was going to see that archive come into the Huntington. And yes, and so here come the trucks. And so it's poignant, but that's where it is. And that was her choice.
But she kept all these things. She identified what they were, and they're like a map for you. And so you're there in the archive, I think, for 4 years. You spend time with that archive.
Yeah, as a freelancing. And then when it started, when I was working on Clock Shop's project, Fridays were my day to go, and I would spend the whole day on Friday. And then once that project was done, I applied for the Jetsy Fellowship. And same thing, I was trying to work it around a freelance schedule. And it was while I was working in the archive on the fellowship that I started to develop this book, but the seeds of it happened while I was finishing up the Clock Shop piece. So it was like freelancing and trying to do this at the same time. So I lived Octavia's life, it felt like.
Well, that's very much in the book. I mean, it's a writer's story, and you're living your story as you're channeling her story. But tell us a little bit. So you're there with all these. There's 386 boxes. Did you touch each one of them? How did you coexist with them? How did you decide how to move between them? What to listen? How did you listen to them?
It's really a good question. I know in the very beginning when I went in, I knew, because in my head I'm thinking interview. So what would it be like if I'm trying to listen to her? I don't want her formal voice on the page. So I don't want the manuscripts. I don't even want drafts of the manuscripts at this point. I want diaries. I want letters. I want to hear what she sounds like when she's not thinking about an audience, a formal audience. And then from there, I started to drill down and I started looking at marginalia. And that's what I felt hard about. I felt really hard for the marginalia because that's where she was really working things out. It's sort of like, so you would see these beautiful pages that were, handwritten, full of like, she's drafting, rough draft, but then it might break and she'd start a letter, or she'd start a note to herself, or and in the margins might be questions or answers for herself, or something like she probably heard on the news. And that's the voice that started to worm itself in my head. So that's where some of the humor comes in. Like, she had this wicked sense of humor, and she could be wry, and she could be, pretty sharp. But I loved what was going back and forth, in her head during the day. And these beautiful pages show you that.
This is a very tactile book. It's gorgeous. It's like, there's a whole page given. We'll talk about it, to her library card. I mean, you really get a sense of the stuff, the stuff in this archive. But the first thing you had to do was, I think, and these questions that were identify the questions you want to ask.
Right.
One is like, how does one become a writer?
Yeah.
And how did she become Octavia E. Butler? What was that trajectory? And it seems like you worked those questions. You let those inform you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was really interested in how someone like Octavia, who lands on this idea of being a writer because she's a reader from a very young age, and she's just swept away. And she talks about, starting to make up stories for herself, where she becomes the star of the story. And so she was very aware at a young age that, like, she wasn't finding stories that were, or finding a place in the world, stories that figured people like her, nor in her own life. So she'd get lost in these stories, but and then she realized that she would tell the stories to her mother. And one day she said, and I realized I was forgetting my stories. And so that's when I started to write them down. And I was so interested in this really organic way of like coming to like, these words and these stories are really important. And then what she did after that, where she had no models at all and very little encouragement, she decides she's going to be a writer. And how does she do it? With these humble objects. So like cast off notebooks, cast off diaries that her mother was a
housekeeper, right?
Housekeeper. She would bring her old books and old diaries. So you see in some of the diaries, some of the pages are filled with somebody else's handwriting, some of it in another language, and she just writes around those. Wow. She makes them her own. And that's just it. I thought, here's a really wonderful example of somebody who didn't focus on what she didn't have. She focused on what she had. And she like did miraculous things with it.
Would you read about the diary? I wanted to talk about how important these, her keeping a journal, this voice is page 32, 33. Okay. That'd be great.
Okay. So from
just some children. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So the next page thinks she might not make it. That would be a nice passage.
Okay. To
middle of the page of 33. Thinks.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. All right. Just as some children make a tent out of 2 chairs and a blanket, Estelle, and that's her middle name, Estelle crawls inside the pages of a journal. She is amassing a small collection of cast-off recycled diaries, most scooped up from a waste bin by her mother in one of her domestic jobs. Estelle sits in the quiet of the house, away from her mother's hymns and Bible verses, away from the noise of children playing outside, opens a diary's cover. She clicks on the radio, tunes the band to 93 KHJ, lets pop songs settle her mood. She comes here to these pages especially to do and say the things she can't loud. Sometimes it's best, she acknowledges, in those pages to keep things to herself, the tangents, the open questions, the most outlandish of notions, feelings and beings, and visualizations. She is learning, belated as it may be, but there is still time to change. I want to go and go and go, she confides on the page. I want to take part. Her quietness, her shyness were so often misunderstood, taken for slowness, for ignorance, for laziness. Finding words for her feelings makes her aware that the wear and tear on her spirit doesn't just come from trying and then coming up short. Weariness and weariness is a result of being corrected again and again, so sternly overcorrected that you just don't bother. You just go deeper into yourself. Sometimes in her journals, she attempts to see what others might see. She gleans that she is perceived as someone who can't be penetrated, someone who floats at the edges of her small world's periphery. Estelle wanders that territory. She claims it and decides to work it as if it were her own new province. That bridge from here to there, out of childhood into adolescence, is precarious. It feels so flimsy. It tosses around in the flurries of yearning and peer pressure and uncertainty. There are long stretches, hours into days, when Estelle thinks she might not make it.
So beautiful. I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier today about this internal, the self-doubt that she had to constantly push against. And it made me, after we talked, I went and pulled off my bookshelf a book by the psychologist Alice Kaplan, Alice Miller, The Untouched Key, about why certain troubled children turn out to be artists, children who haven't had ideal, childhoods or homes. And, it really, she talks about how it's so necessary for the ones who do succeed, that we found that there's always a sympathetic and helpful witness who confirms the child's perception. And I thought, like, for Octavia, it was Octavia. It was, she had to be her own witness. And the journals, don't you think, are herself bearing witness to her coming to the meeting.
That's beautiful. And it's absolutely true. And she would revisit, she would revisit journals years later, 10 years later. And those to me are really fascinating. She'll go back and it'll be 10 years and she will start talking to that person she was 10 years ago. And then she kind of starts to untangle some of what's happening in the present, so that she can figure out, like, okay, so I was feeling that way then, I'm better now. So that means that I can do this. I can still go beyond that. But yeah, so there was this reassessment, that happened. So yes, absolutely.
I love your phrase. You were talking about how in her home, you said the blues aren't records spinning on a turntable, but heavy moods that drift in and visit both mother and daughter.
Yeah.
Estelle's diary serves as another secret escape route, a closet to hide in, or a window out of which to look. And then I was thinking of just like this, the kind of, lineage of diaries. I mean, I started thinking about Anne Frank. I mean, how this is a friend. I mean, her diary is really, to see herself. So we need to set the scene here for people too. So this is in a small bungalow where she lived with her mother in Pasadena, which is, I see some of the people here are not all from California. So Pasadena is to the east of LA, nudged up against the San Gabriel Mountains. And it's also where Lynell lives. Yeah. So tell us how Octavia animated, Pasadena for you.
Yeah, I have to say, it was the strangest thing. I knew that she was from Pasadena before I got into the archive, but there was something about sitting and looking and then looking at these addresses. And I'm like, Marengo, Washington, Fair Oaks. And then she would be really specific about something, like, I know where that is. I know where that is. And then I realized I live in her old neighborhood. I live steps away from where she went to the library, caught her buses, went to the market. She is around me, like that. And, I could and so coming back sometimes from the archive after having read something that had transpired that day, sometimes I would just go like, okay, there's a little address, and she had described something she'd seen on her walk. She was concerned that a neighbor had done something to a tree or not done something to a tree. I'm like, I'm going to go see what's happened to the tree. There was that, but also this idea of putting on her lenses, and looking at the same mountains as she does, and taking the same walks by chance, that she's around me. And it really did add to my own knowledge of place, the history of place here. She talks about, the schools, some of the early schools she went to, the elementary schools, she was in, schools that were segregated and then eventually got knocked down once they desegregated Pasadena schools. But she talks about like how much of that part of her childhood was torn down. And so memory for her was something, she goes, she didn't look back in that sense, that built memory, that didn't matter. She goes, I have it, it's in me. I don't need to go back and look at it.
So she was of that place. You were, of that place. She was also of Los Angeles in general, and the way she moved around it. Most people in LA have a car. She traveled by bus, and the bus was a kind of, we're both friends of Marisela Norte, wonderful poet, who, another poet of the bus route. But for Octavia, you said, the bus was really moving theater, right?
Yes.
Like, so she could be alone, and she could also overhear people, right? Or even interact, right?
Yes. And she really looked forward to those trips because it put her in and around people. She was very, very, very shy. And she talked about being shy and an introvert. And so, and being a writer, it forces you to be, and she has this great quote about, being a writer, forces you to be alone with your thoughts, all of them, and it's true. It's like you're shut in. So being out in the world and being able to eavesdrop and watch people and interact with them and practice her Spanish. She took Spanish classes, and some of these journals, in order to hide them from, whatever she was writing, from family members who might peek in them, she would write in Spanish in some of them. So, just to like have, to practice, so this sort of being in the world, but also like on a magic carpet, like to, like moving through space and moving through all the different Los Angeleses that you get to through Pasadena, downtown, and it's really key for her.
When she came to do a talk at Central Library years ago for our literary series, she came on the bus. I thought that was wonderful. I think she was the only writer that, no, that's not true. Maricela probably came on the bus. I love the title of the book, which is A Handful of Earth, a Handful of Sky. But I was also thinking, the way you describe her mind in this book, her mind is always working, clicking, digesting, assimilating the colors of light, the ache of an adjacent broken heart. It also is, the book could also be called A Beautiful Mind. I mean, it's like you really are animating this very restless, this curiosity that's just kind of electric. You really capture that and compliment it.
Thank you. I mean, she was grabbing from so many places, she called herself a news junkie, and she was. I mean, you look at the clip files and they're just everything. And it's so fascinating to see the way, that things are organized there too, where it's like immortality and cults, and she was biodiversity. And I mean, she was looking at vampires, like, and all of these are in little clip files that not little, big, vast clip files. And she talks about how when she was writing, it was hard for her to watch the news because the news pulled her in so much, and out of her writing, she was inspired by, news events. And And she would do character sketches, not so much necessarily based on people who were in the news, but so say she would take something, she'd take a word like charisma, and then kind of delve deep into what that meant and who was charismatic, and she'd make a list of different people who were charismatic, and it could, it would be John F. Kennedy and Elvis Presley, and then she might start from there. But all of these things, like, so all of this is going on, this is going on, the news, and
So she was overhearing, she was reading, but she was also taking in signs, which I think that's a really interesting part of the book. And I wondered if you could read the little journal excerpt. It's on page 139. That's the one that's in the center of the page. That's right from the journal.
Okay. Mama's pea tree has leaves with bright orange persimmons, oranges, lemons, grapefruit, ripe and ripening. Most not ripe yet. Mini palm seeds, looking like camphor berries, but harder. When the cats are away, the jays come down to eat their food. ? For drink, their water! ! One red-leafed sycamore, most only go yellow and brown, then naked.
And then that last graph on that page, which is your right.
The planet keeps talking, sending signals, steady communicating. She has captured its transmission. It's in crisis. It's struggling. If you're quiet, anyone can hear it, even see it.
That really touched me so deeply. I mean, the sense that, it's there in her writing, but she was taking it in on such a visceral level from such intimate signs right there in her neighborhood. It's not like
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that was key. Yeah, absolutely. Like, you didn't have to go anywhere. Like, she just was watching. She was just paying attention. And this is something that went on her whole adult life, young adult life. She started researching climate and writing about climate in the late 70s and early 80s, like, just out of curiosity.
Wow. She grew up, see, what year was she born? Do you remember?
1947.
So she grew up in the era, we both of us grew up in Los Angeles, not so far apart from each other. And smog was, there were days when, now we can't see the mountains sometimes if there's wildfires.
Right.
Then you couldn't see the mountains, half the time, more than half the time, because of smog. And that was probably true even in Pasadena.
Yeah.
I was going to Pasadena in the 60s, and like you could not see across the street.
Ugh.
It was like a veil.
Yeah.
So to imagine her, moving through that landscape and trying to imagine what that was, when she did come to Central Library, since I know now that you would have loved to do a live interview with her, I wish I'd asked you. I wish I'd known.
Yeah.
But the book really is, it's not just a posthumous interview, Lynell. It's really like a posthumous collaboration, because, and maybe you could talk about that a little bit, how your own, search and struggle as a writer, or the things that you deal with, making your way in the world as a writer, how you see them mirrored, or reflected in her work, in this ephemera.
Right. Her struggle, there's so much in her struggle that's familiar. And especially being this idea of being underestimated and really trying to like make yourself seen and heard, that your vision of the world, what you see every day, those persimmons, whatever it happens to be, is important enough to write about, to have conversations about. She was diminished so much. I don't know sometimes how she went on, but she did. And there was this fire in her. And so as I'm reading and going through, especially the journal entries and some letters, that when she had close friendships, and sometimes she would talk a little bit about it, but she kept so much of this, to herself. That felt familiar too, because it's like you kind of want to try to work it out and not feel as if like you want to work it out and you want to get your script together. And that's what I kept seeing in her. She was always trying to perfect, this the person who was going to be in front of the world. So I make this really, you in the book, this break where, at home, she's called Estelle, Estella, Junie, her nicknames, but she makes a decision at a certain point, like, I need to have more, I need to have. And so when she begins to call herself Octavia in the book, and in the world, like that becomes the figure, that becomes her guise, that becomes her armor, you are not going to diminish Octavia. You're just not. 6 foot tall Octavia, you are not going to diminish. But she had to work at that. She did not like public speaking. She did not, she was so hard on herself. Like after she would do something, she'd write journal about like, I didn't get this right. Or if you don't know what to say in a panel, don't say anything, better just be quiet. And she just really was hard on herself. But then I see her and I'm thinking, oh my God, she was fantastic. So she was just really hard. And so that I recognize too, like this kind of driving yourself,
But when you think about, how she had a no safety net, so she had to decide whether she'd buy a can of beans or pawn her typewriter, which her mom did give her that was quite a beautiful gift at 10. But the people who were doubting her, and she also had to learn how to tune out the negative voices.
Absolutely.
And some of them were negative because they were concerned about her. Like, quote, who do you think you are? Like,
exactly.
how about, why aren't you thinking about a job at the post office?
Right.
How?
Right. Because they're thinking security, and they're thinking at a time, especially like, who does this? You're a Black girl, they're not writers. You could do that as a hobby. That's wonderful. And it's great that you have this great hobby, but but she could see what what they couldn't see. And she got tired of explaining it. And she didn't want to always feel like she was on the defensive. So she, she kept her own counsel and she did not tell people. So yeah, it was exactly that. It was they did it out of love. It wasn't out of, especially if it was family and close friends, that was not about trying to diminish her. They wanted her to be safe and they wanted her to have a plan. And, because as you said, there was very flimsy safety net for her.
So she, she had her university, her graduate school was the library. She had her library card. And I love the story, when we talk about her not having these role models, she, how do you become a writer? Like, where's the book that tells you how to become a writer? But she was on the bus going, and she tell us that story. I love that story.
Such a great story. Yeah, she's finally trying to send out her stories, and she finds a teacher to type one of her stories for her because she doesn't even know how to like use the typewriter or line up the page. And it's so wonderful. And then she realized, like, well, once I have the story, like, how do I even send it out? And who do I send it to?
Right.
And really had no idea. She had no idea. I mean, she was reading these science fiction magazines and fantasy magazines, but she really didn't have an idea. And she got on the bus one day and she found a copy of the Writer magazine sitting in the bus seat. And it was like, there it is, serendipity, and it gave her and then she's like, okay, now I know these exist and I'm going to go look for them in the library. And that's how she figured out how her plan of action and what she should do, and even how to write a query letter, and things like that. She had no idea,
And I love that she kept all her, what do you call those slips when we used to fill out slips?
Yes.
All slips at the library. So you could see all the books she checked out.
Yeah. And there are piles and piles and piles of them. Piles.
Tell us a few of the titles like that you surprised you. There were like some really wild ones.
I can't remember all of them. And in fact, even the book is sitting here, but one of the things that she also used, I mean, she was looking up karate and manual, it was like martial arts and things like that. But she was also looking up, there was a point in her life where she didn't, like, she started to kind of waver and like, well, I'm going to maybe need a backup job thing, but like, how do I figure out what that would be? So she used the library to research careers based on her personality traits. And she like, I don't want to work with the public. So, so she knew she didn't want to be a librarian. That was one of the things that was funny. She was like, but she also researched that. So she was also she researched and wrote her first book at the library. So those exist, a lot of the material for Kindred too later, she checked out from the library,
And many of the librarians there, when I worked there, I mean, they remember her. I mean, they remember her specifically, where she sat,
Yeah, Glenn Creason is the one. I called him and I said, do you remember? Because she said exactly where she sat. And she would go to the history section. So I called Glenn. I said, oh, yes, I remember her. And he said she always came in looking extremely focused, like you just did not want to disturb her. She's friendly, but like she was there to work. It was her job. It was her job.
Oh my God, she worked so hard and she suffered so much for her. I mean, she, the denial of other pleasures as she pursued this. I just want to let you know, we're going to open up to questions in just a minute. Her drive is just something quite, you just don't see that very often.
No. And it's like this vision, like, and she protected those two things. And like that drive was to protect her vision and her voice. That's what I realized. Like, as I kept moving through and that's what I have stayed with me too, is that she knew, even though other people didn't know, she knew what she was trying to do, and she had to protect it. And that drive to get up, even when she was pushed down or she's waiting for money and she's not sure she can pay the rent, that month, or keep the lights on, or there's this amusing scene. I keep going back to it where she's and I gotten up to work on something on deadline, and she's like, all I have is, I just had the most interesting dinner. It was popcorn and ground beef, some bizarre
Yeah, she said it was breakfast. She said, I didn't have any cereal or fruit or anything. So all she had, she said, I fried up the hamburger and I popped some popcorn. And while I ate this strange meal, it was really really funny. You live near to where she lived. And I thought it was so touching to learn that you also live near where she's buried and that you have able to visit the grave, right?
Yeah. Yes, I can actually walk to the cemetery from where I live. It's about a 40-minute walk, 30-minute walk. It's not that far. She's at Mountain View, and I started going with Ayanna Jameson, who I met in the archive. She heads the excuse me, the Octavia Butler Legacy Network. And that's one thing that has happened through this work. I think about this a lot, like how Octavia really was looking for community, and it was hard. She was isolated, and all this community that has bloomed around her is quite beautiful. And I have made 4 fairly close friends, and Ayanna is one of them, from this time in the archive. And so Ayanna was the one who took me there for the first time. And, we went together and just sat and talked. about all kinds of things, and there she was, with us. And, but we talked about work and writing and school and books and, and then we went and had coffee,
Oh.
Yeah.
And you actually did get to meet her in person. I mean, you didn't get to have that interview, but your mother first took you there.
Yes.
Right. That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
I mean, you really were the person to do this, Lynell. I mean, you.
Guess so. And it was one of those things where, like, yeah, my mom, she's the Octavia Butler, she was, her books were on the shelf. My mom was an English teacher. She would buy extra copies of books to keep in her classroom for kids who she felt might be motivated by something different. And like, she would see that, they may be shy or they may be this, and like, maybe they just haven't found the writer for them. And there was something about, like, my mom could hand it to them and say, this is written by a Black woman and, look at what she did. And so, yes, so I went to see her for the very first time with my mom.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Such a great. Well, now the fact that she did give her archive to the Huntington, and that you've, in a sense, mined it, and put it between the covers of this really beautiful book, which is out from Angel City Press. I mean, I just feel like there's something in there that we can now, all of us can kind of, feast on from this, and it's so rich. I mean, each little section, I just kind of want to kind of live in it for a while. So I just want to deeply thank you for this work and for the forces that brought you and Octavia together in so many ways. It's a beautiful pairing.
Thank you so much. It means a lot. And the way you phrase that means it means a lot too, because I felt like all the times, that I've spent working there is this real connection. There feels like a connection because there's so much very personal stuff there, but there's something about, there's a difference when I'm a journalist. And so the thing we always want is access, how long can I spend with somebody? What kind of quality time can I spend with someone? And even if you and I have spent 9 months following people, a year following people, really getting to know them, there's nothing like this, where you're not sitting across the way from them and they could be sharing things that are really personal, but this is different. I'm looking over her shoulder. I'm in her arm, I'm watching her write out, a letter, a check, whatever. I'm inside of her in a very different kind of way that I would never be, as a journalist, even doing my best work, and so I really wanted to honor that intimacy. And I also, with the book, I wanted people to have a sense of what it was like to sit with these pieces of paper and look at what these pages looked like. And so when you hold the book, you feel like you're holding something that's hers. That was really important to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Let's take some questions. It looks like we've got some in there. I think, Hallie, are you?
Yes, I am here and ready. The first question we have is from Angel City Press. And it's a 2 to 3 part question. How did Octavia Butler relate to the community, if that's a fair term, of science fiction writers throughout the arc of her career? And does such a community exist today?
Okay. She ultimately bored her way into that community, and it started when she became part of something called the Open Door program, and which was offered through the screenwriters. What is it? Why am I blanking on? It's it'll come to me. Anyway, she does this program, and it was offered to quote unquote minorities, and so it's people of color, women, and you could pick which genre you were going to be part of. And there she met Harlan Ellison, and Harlan Ellison was Guild. There we go. And Screenwriters Guild. And he was writing, and he was really impressed with the work that she did there and suggested that she attend Clarion and this workshop in Pennsylvania. And she did not have a lot of money and said no, she couldn't do it. And it got worked out, finances, and that plunked her into this community.
Didn't he contribute some money so she could go?
Yeah,
That was cool.
yeah. So that was boom. And that's what started her connections. Then she started going to science fiction conventions, and she writes a lot about that in her journals. And some of it is very funny, here she is, she's often the only Black person, only Black woman. She talks a lot about what that felt like. But sometimes it's humorous, and so she has a real sense of who she was moving in and out of those worlds. And when I saw her speak as a journalist, I actually did. I was in the room with her, did talk to her at this science fiction convention called Black to the Future in Seattle. And she gave the keynote. And the keynote was about exactly this, was about community and how all these Black science fiction and fantasy writers and filmmakers and directors, world building and this idea of like, I yearned to be in a room like this, I yearned to be in a room like this and not be the only person. So make the most of it, exchange cards, talk to people, be in community. So that was very moving, seeing her, and then going back like that was the thing about like when I was at that convention, I did not realize how lonely she had felt, so thinking back at it now, like I realized like she really meant that for us, so.
Ellie, is there more of that question, or are you going to?
I think.
The next question, you just kind of answered a question from Noel, which is, did you ever meet her?
Did you see the one from Elena? How do you see Octavia's work, specifically re-speaking to this awakened or waking generation?
Waking generation.
Oh, that's a big question. I mean, it's so clear that she has struck a chord. It's Octavia. When she was living, she would tell people, I'm not prescient. I'm just paying attention. Not clairvoyant. I'm just paying attention. I think the things that she saw, the things that she tried to warn us about over and over again, the fact that they're happening and in such accuracy, I think strikes a chord. I think the thing that young people are really plugged into about her writing is that it's not just the fear part, or the thing about, like she said, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to get you to take action. And she's giving people ways of thinking about community and joining together and love, and that change happens and you have to learn how to pivot and grow and move with it. And I think that and finding pleasure, because she worked really hard herself, but she didn't know how to like locate joy, and she knew the things that made her happy, and she loved nature, and she loved being, there's this one of my favorite photos of her is if you go on the internet and put Octavia Butler in horse, like you will see this beautiful picture of her standing in a green meadow with her arm around this horse and this smile, this like $1 million smile, so I think while we're fighting, through all this terrible, terrible stuff we have inherited, is that change happens. We have to address it. It happens. This is what she's warning us about too. But you can build community, build alliance, find love, and that seems to be speaking to a lot of the young people that are really connecting to the books. That's what I'm finding when I speak to them. Yeah.
Another question we have from Zoe is, what kind of relationships did she have in her life?
She had, I think the fact that she always says that writing came first, and there's some very funny things in there about, like, she would write down about, I don't really know if I could be married because I like my writing too much. I need to have time. I would have to find a husband who would like give me space to do these things. And she starts this at a very young age, like realizing where her priorities were in terms of relationships. She had many long relationships or friendships with friends. And I mean from every aspect of her life, from very young age, from elementary school to high school. She was a really dedicated letter writer. So there's a ton of letters in there to people. But I have not seen much evidence in the archive that tells me if there was some very special person and there are some boxes that are sealed. We don't know about it. I don't know, I can't speak to that. But she did have, I think there's this thing about Octavia where, she just seems like this sort of isolated, floating, being. But she had deep feelings and deep yearnings and had to and I think made this choice to be, the writing was the most important thing, and who else was around her and floating around her. I don't know. There were no diary entries about, like a long-term relationship that I found.
Are the boxes you said that are sealed? They're sealed by her request? Do you know?
I don't know how that works. So I can't really speak to that. But there is language in the finding aid that explains that certain boxes are going to be sealed until 20 this, 20 that. So I'm not sure. I don't know how that works.
Another question we have from Beatrice is, I would love for you to talk about the notes from her teachers, especially the ones that did not support her. Why did she keep those? And how did she overcome all these voices that put her down?
It's a really good question. She kept everything. So those were there. But those are the ones, I didn't see a lot of positive ones. That was the thing. I think that's what struck me, was that there was so much negative feedback of what she kept. And also, I could only use my head too as a writer who kept things like manuscripts. I also suspect that she was keeping the stories that mattered to her. So no matter what anybody said, she might have tossed out other things. So she kept them. And again, if you saw the archive, you'd understand it's like there's like so much there. So I don't think so much she was singling those out, as like, I'm going to learn from this and I'm going to fight against this. But but I do think the way she overcame the negative voices is that she continued to make herself better. She continued to read and write and make herself unassailable. I mean, that was the thing that becomes clear. I mean, the time the time reading, the time writing, the time rewriting, it's the thing that she figured out from all of her reading. Is like, this is what writers do. You keep trying to make it better and better and better and better. And then people were responding eventually, and she would start to sell things. But then she'd go for long stretches with not selling 5 years, not selling one thing.
Then you made point also that someone asked her, what she couldn't say, she didn't say to them publicly, like, I'm a writer, because she hadn't sold anything in 5 years. But then you added in your note, but she always knew she was a writer, so that she's almost like in her DNA in some way.
Exactly. It's funny because at first when I was exactly that, because when I was reading it, and I just thought, she usually owns it. Why did she not own it in that moment? And maybe because it was a formal setting, because she was writing so early. Yeah. And it was in her DNA. It just was, I can't imagine her doing anything else. I mean, when you look at such a young age, when she was just making shapes on paper and, just writing out song lyrics, like, I mean, the things that she just kept saved, of the writing, just the act of writing was also important to her. It seems like, typing up song lyrics, for the radio, she'd hear on the radio.
Receipts for typewriter ribbons. I mean, shopping list.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah. So, it's, and there, journals on her bus trips and on her train trips. I mean, she was never without a notebook, and that's her advice, to writers. But it's like she really, 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 really adhered to that. Took a notebook to the movies.
And tell us the difference between, like, so she would write in a journal, but sometimes she would do. I love when you talked about sessioning. Mm-hmm. So having like these chats with herself, sort of. Right?
Yes. Exactly. Those journal entries were so interesting to me because they were different from the regular diaries. Like, and she designated, they were different. Like there were the journals she wrote in, the daily journals, and the things where she might be dealing with her page counts or like working out a character study or something, or one of her characters was giving her trouble. Like, for example, Lauren from the Parables, she really like had to fight with Lauren as a character. So that would be in her journal. But in her sessioning journals, something might have happened to her. She might have gotten in an argument with somebody, or she might have had a bad reading, or she might have had something happened during her day. And that's where she would go to dump it. So it would just come out, and she would just write, like, why the self-destruct, why did you do this? And then she would leave it there. It would be out, and she would leave it there. And she could go back to the work. And I thought, that's something I should adopt. Like, it's not. So your journal, your daily journal is not cluttered with, I'm having a bad day, and I'm so blue. That's over here. And then you can deal with the work stuff here, or your life stuff there, your other life stuff. And so, yeah, the fact that she would take that and maybe write an affirmation before she got started, like that might be her prompt. And then she would go forward. So, yeah, that was a place to just dump things. Yeah. And I love those. Those are really great. Those journals are great.
Do you have any last thoughts, or Louise, any last questions before we say goodnight?
Lynell, do you want to conclude with any thoughts on the project itself?
I was thinking about, I guess I'd like to just to say about her, the thing that still kind of floats around me when I think about her and her work, and is this idea of persistence. And the thing that stays with me is, like, and I, especially after hearing Kamala Harris the other night say, dream ambitiously. This is her whole life, is this ambitious dream, everything she did, and so this idea of try a difficult path, walk into uncertainty, float, just float with it, roll with it. And when someone is in your way and telling you like, no, you can't do that, that's just not for you. See them for who they are and see what paths they haven't taken. And that's what I've learned from her, is that she had so many people like, no, don't do that. Or how could you think? And she just kept dreaming ambitiously. And so dream ambitiously, everybody.
Perfect.
Do like Octavia. Be Octavia.
She's such a huge inspiration. Thank you both so much for being here for this amazing conversation. Thanks everyone for joining us and tuning in. Order the book. It's fantastic. Yeah. And good night.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.
I see